Lost Judgment is not a good game. It suffers from characters that are far too static and has plot, pacing, and gameplay issues. With regards to gameplay, the action is done fairly well, and the combat flows pretty nicely. However, charging attacks can only be done through combos now, which means that breaking a boss's guard or staggering them is not typically easily done. The parkour, detective, and stealth sections are tedious. They ruin the pacing in the second half of the game in particular. The chase sequences ruin the tone of the game absolutely, as they appear in the most tense and supposed to be serious moments of the game and replace them with an almost jovial music score and take way too long to get back to the action after actually having started. The characters are far too static as a whole. I believe the only ones who actually have an arc in the game are the bullies that you investigate in the high school at the beginning. I appreciate that arc a lot, but it feels ridiculous that everyone else, including the protagonist and the main bad guys, do not have an arc to speak of. Most minor characters only appear for a few minutes, so they don't even have a chance to have an arc, and that's only if they're not sidelined for the entire game, like many are, except for a few scenes. The first half of the plot of the game starts out pretty well, where Yagami and Kaito, who is Yagami's partner, they help some fellow detectives on a case in Tokyo's Ijincho district at Seiryu High School investigating to find evidence of bullying. The first half of the game is handled well. There's good pacing, new info gets revealed as you go, and you get small build-ups and payoffs. During this time, you start discovering that there's a lot of bullying-induced suicides that are somehow connected, and there seems to be a lot of deaths of the bullies themselves that are also connected to a single person in the game, which happens to be the teacher that Yagami likes to go to for information. Her name is Yokosawa, and she works at Seiryu High School. Eventually, when trying to get information from Sawa, Yagami is attacked by assassins for investigating the deaths, which evidences a much larger conspiracy than anybody was aware of at the time. However, soon after this time, Sawa gets murdered, and the plot basically falls apart at this point. Not because it stops making sense, but because the plot gets far too complicated. They go from a story about serial killers and bullying, which makes sense and flows really well, to adding in political intrigue, political conspiracy, secret police, police having issues with each other, not cooperating. It's too much. It doesn't have enough time to be set up and work well, because this happens over halfway through the game. You've already gotten your main setup for who's the bad guy, who's the good guy, all that kind of stuff, and you add on way too much at the end. It doesn't function well, and even with all this stuff, the game isn't cramming things in there to get information in. You have a lot of filler, so you have a bunch of new stuff you haven't well established yet, and you have a bunch of filler that isn't actually progressing the game forward. It's a disaster. It's a recipe for a terrible plot in the second half, and it ruins a very, very good and promising first half. A lot of the pacing problems aren't helped by the fact that you get a lot of information in one specific exposition dump, or really two with the same character that are very closely connected. And they confirm a lot of things for you and explain a bunch of other stuff for you. It's not well done. And I won't say the voice actors do bad or the writing is poor in this for the dialogue here, but it's so much at one time, and it doesn't make the story flow well, especially when you already have other stuff you're trying to add on to it and you have a bunch of other filler things. You can't just exposition dump in one spot. It doesn't work. By this point of the game, you already know who the main bad guy is, and that guy's name is Jin Suwana, who's a former teacher and is now turned serial killer killing bullies, and that's due to his failure to prevent a suicide at his school, where he was allowing the bullies to continue bullying this child, and never learned that this was so bad until the kid already committed suicide. They don't treat Kuwana like that for the majority of the game. They hang out with him a bunch and team up with him a bunch, and even at the end, Yagami says he doesn't know whose justice is right, and that's not for him or Kuwana to decide. And really, that's a ridiculous thing to say. There's a million reasons Kuwana is wrong in this game. One of which is that he's murdering without a trial, clearly enough. Secondly, he claims that he wants to have people take responsibility for all this bullying stuff, including people who allow it to happen, but he's never taken responsibility himself. His whole reason for doing this is that he failed, and he's never taken public responsibility for allowing the death to happen. And instead, he's killing other people that he's blaming for it instead, the bullies. While you could sympathize with that, and the fact that, yeah, the legal system doesn't have a real good way to deal with this problem, as they say in game, that still doesn't justify what he's doing. To top all that off, Suwana gets away with it. They actually let him get away with it. The main characters let him get away. All the while knowing, because Kuwana tells them, he is going to continue killing people. He is going to continue killing bullies, or at least letting the parents kill them like he does in the game. He's not going to stop just because they let him get away and they caught him this time. I don't understand why the writers of Lost Judgment would choose to let this happen. Not because the good guy needs to win every time. I think it's okay that Suwana gets away. The problem for me is more that the main characters let him get away. In a game that's all about former lawyers and current lawyers trying to attain justice, someone who has been killing outside of the law seems like someone you'd want to get justice for. However, Higami for most of the game is only concerned with getting justice for Yokosawa's death, instead of all of the people who have been killed, even if they were bullies, even if they were pretty crappy people. He's not concerned with that. In a game that focuses on people who care about the law, it just doesn't seem like something they would allow to happen. And I understand that in the game, one of the reasons that they let him get away is that they don't have any evidence on him, they couldn't keep him, but there's a number of ways you could get evidence on him. There's at least 7 parents, because there's at least 7 people that he killed, we know of, that should be able to talk about his role in getting them to the point where they could kill the bullies. There's all of the evidence they've gathered to that point, and I understand that it's not necessarily conclusive, but if you can force them to do that, or if you were to pull the traditional Yakuza thing where you beat up the guy enough and cause him enough brain damage he finally decides to confess to what he's done, then you could have an ending to the game where you actually are able to get justice for even the bullies that died. And that doesn't happen. The arguments the main characters put forward during the game are poor. They do not seem to understand their own position very well. And the game is poor as a result, which is a shame, because Yakuza, for me, has always been something that I enjoyed the story of. I thought the characters were acting consistently, and in this game, it does not seem like that happened. I only can imagine that the arguments in the writer's room had something to do with it. And I would recommend you don't play this game. It's not good enough for you to spend your money on. Maybe if it's on a massive discount and you just want to play the combat, if you don't care about story, then this is a game for you, because combat is pretty good, and you don't have to do many of the parkour missions and the stealth missions if you can avoid them by just not doing them in the main story, because you have a bunch of side content to do, a bunch of mini games like all Yakuza games. If you care about story, this is not the game for you. Do not play this game. The story does not work, and if you think otherwise, you're wrong. You're just wrong. So, yeah, that is my first YouTube review, and I will thank you for dealing with this poor audio quality, and thank you for watching.